This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's enter the issue to our panel of experts. They include former legislator Connie Wilson, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, John Locke Foundation's Becki Gray, and former Lieutenant Governor Dennis Wicker. This week we're going to consider not what the legislature did, but how they accomplished their work. We want to probe whether A.G. Roy Cooper's decision not to defend our gay marriage ban was political or practical. And we study a new report showing charter schools get more bang for the buck than traditional schools. Should be interesting, so let's get started. Last week we talked about what the legislature did in the short session. This week we want to focus on how they went about their work before they finally left August 1st. Dennis, one pundit observed this was a kinder, gentler session than that of 2013. They passed so much controversial legislation in that first year that they felt the need to make fewer dramatic changes in the short session. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, of course it's an election year, and that's probably why they were a little bit gentler and a little more kinder. But I will tell you that the real issue, I think, is whether or not they did a good job this last session. And with some of the unfinished business that occurred with the coal ash and certainly with the Medicaid reform left on the table, you know, Tom, I think the real question is whether or not voters will remember the full 2 years. I mean, the social issues that they took on in the 13th session with expanding gun rights so they could have guns in bars and tampering with the election laws and gay ban in North Carolina, constitutional amendment. You know, I think among other things, people want the legislature to help put education in the forefront and some of the things that went on there. I think that the majority party came to town and said, we're going to do these things, and they did do them. The question is whether or not the voters approve of them now. Well,
Connie, dovetailing on that just a little bit, the kinder, gentler thing. They certainly weren't kinder and gentler toward each other or to the governor, were they?
Well, actually, it was a very rough year, and some very unusual strategies were used in debating publicly over the budget. Had a press conference with the speaker and the governor there, which is very unusual, and the Senate leadership was not there. I think some of those strategies actually probably lengthened the session at least a week or two, maybe more. I know coal ash has not been acted upon yet, but there's a good possibility next week that that may come up. But it has been a little bit harder. The policies were gentler this go around, but with each other it was much tougher.
Chris, speaking of this, they can't even agree on adjournment over there. I mean, they said they were going to be back next week if there were bills that the governor vetoed and that they had to come back to try to override, which, as of this moment, we understand there won't be any. But in order to do this, they've got to have skeleton sessions now every 4 days.
Well, I think it's important for folks who are watching to remember they didn't adjourn. They did a recess. It's a little bit like Congress. They literally have taken a recess. The House is coming back August 14th. The Senate doesn't want to come back and take any votes until November because there were no vetoes. So I don't think they're going to do coal ash at least until November, which is not coincidentally after the election. That's when they're going to do Medicaid reform. I think there's some long, I'm worried that the animosity is not going away. There were some very heated words, especially about the coal ash legislation that's now being said openly in the media. So these are wounds that I think it's definitely not I have some disagreement about whether it was a kinder, gentler session overall. It definitely was not between the House and the Senate.
But Becki, okay, so they're still in session legally.
Technically,
now the laws say they can't, the laws that they passed say they can't be raising money while they are in PACs and special interests while they're in session. How's this going to work out when they've got campaigns to run?
Well, that's a good question, and I think it's probably something that is on their minds as to how to do this. Now, again, they're scheduled to come back. The House has said they're coming back next week. We don't know whether the Senate's going to comply with that or not, whether they adjourn then or whether they just keep this open until November. But that's a consideration with fundraising and campaigning and getting out there, particularly for those legislative candidates.
The caucuses can raise money, though, the House and Senate caucuses, which is...
The caucuses can, but back to the November Medicaid special session, that's really not on the table either because there was no adjournment resolution that it was agreed to. Right? So right now they're just still in session forever and ever and ever.
It's interesting because one of the things that happens, there's several bills, including appointments to various boards and commissions that the President Pro Tem makes, the Speaker makes. It's never a controversial thing of who those people are, but because of the way the Senate left, that bill passed the House. The Senate has to vote to agree with that appointments bill or those people won't be appointed. The Senate has been pretty clear this past week, they may change their mind, that they're not going to take any votes on anything until November. So we have boards and commissions, and some of these are important, Environmental Management Commission and others who make big policies.
So they're going to have vacancies.
They're going to have vacancies or at least not have people appointed because of a dispute about how to leave Raleigh. That's what we're really talking about.
Dennis, one of the things that I found interesting in the debate and discussion, the follow-up, the backwash, if you will, from this legislative session this past week was the issue over teacher pay raises. Now, the teachers complained that most of what the legislature did was eliminate longevity pay and consolidate the steps in their pay system. Governor McCrory says that NCAE has deliberately mischaracterized this pay raise, and if they'd have been passed by Democrats, the teachers would be praising it. What do you think of this?
Well, I think there's utter confusion about that legislation. It does appear that the longevity pay was rolled into the raise, whereby the teachers that have 10 years or 15 years got a substantial raise, but those teachers at the tail end of their career got little, if any, and in some instances might have lost money in terms of that.
The governor says no, that's not true.
Well, I understand what the governor says, but I think they've got to sort all this out because it is very confusing, and I think even the teachers are having a hard time wondering what's going on with their pay raise.
And I've got to bring up one other thing that happened this past week. We found out midweek that Art Pope, the budget director, is going to be leaving the governor's office come September. Number one, was this a surprise to you, Connie? And secondly, what kind of impact is this going to have?
Well, as was mentioned in the governor's press conference today, you know, Art Pope only committed to stay 1 year, so he got a freebie with 1 extra year. I think Art's institutional knowledge and his understanding of policy in all these different areas is invaluable to any governor, Governor McCrory or whoever else is out there. So I hope they keep his cell phone very close and it's the first number that they can quickly dial because he is definitely a wonderful resource.
Push 1 to call Art.
That's right.
Yeah, all right. Well, for those of you saying you'd like to have more NC Spin, I've got some good news for you. You can have additional video content from our panel and other leading opinion makers all on our website, ncspin.com. After each show, we tape what we call the After Spin. Our panelists get to tell you what they wish they'd said on the show, as well as give you some comments on some other topics. In addition, we have NC Spin Perspectives posted throughout the week. So in print, on video, keep up throughout the week by visiting ncspin.com. Also catch us at NC Spin on Facebook and at NC Spin Tweets. Balanced debate for the old North State. When we come back, we're going to talk about Cooper and the gay marriage ban.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
My name is Bernie Teal. Sunburst Farms has been in my family for over 35 years. Last year I had to do something I'd never done before. Destroy 10 acres of good squash. I wasn't able to find enough workers. The opportunity is there. American families are demanding locally grown vegetables, and I want to provide that to them. So please tell Congress that we need immigration reform now.
Your family physician supports Medicaid reform. That's good for North Carolina patients, providers, and taxpayers.
For over a year, we've worked with the Governor and the General Assembly on a plan for responsible Medicaid reform.
The Senate's proposed Medicaid changes are a departure from this plan. Changes that could lead to a decrease in the number of primary care physicians providing care in communities that need them the most.
The destruction of our state's medical home network, a network that prevents unnecessary hospital and emergency room visits.
And disregards the elderly, the blind, and disabled, and the health care they need. Care we're morally and legally obligated to provide.
Now is not the time to disregard the progress we've made. Now is the time for lawmakers to implement responsible Medicaid reform that protects and improves health care for all North Carolinians.
Visit rnchealthcare.com and tell your lawmaker to support responsible Medicaid reform.
We now return to NC Spin.
We've been focusing so much on the budget and the legislature, we haven't had enough time to talk about some other issues of interest. One of them involves the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruling saying that Virginia's ban on gay marriages was unconstitutional. North Carolina Attorney General Roy Cooper quickly responded that this ruling convinced him our ban would also be overturned and that he was no longer going to defend our state law. Connie, the LGBTQ community was ecstatic over Cooper's announcement, but Republicans and State Senate President Phil Berger were upset that the man who's sworn to uphold our laws is backing away from doing so. The charge is that Cooper's playing politics. What do you think?
Well, I know Roy well. We used to play basketball together with the legislative team, and he was one of the few guys who would actually pass me the ball because I'm not very good. So I can tell you he's a very nice guy. But he did tell the public that, yes, I am going to defend this. And it is something that's, I think, very important for all elected officials, that you have the Constitution, you have the laws, and people are supposed to obey those and defend them and do their jobs. And so it is something that could be perceived, even if it wasn't Roy or another person, a governor or a legislator, that's their job.
But he did defend it, and what happened is the jurisdiction of a higher court over the federal court in North Carolina said this ban is unconstitutional. Ours is very similar to Virginia.
Okay, but didn't specific.
But that's like saying going to work. It's like going to work and saying the CEO says you can't have a raise, and then what do? Well, the CEO says I think I'll go to somebody lower and see if I can get one.
And sometimes you do.
No, you don't.
But the thing that was interesting about this, Dennis, is that this press conference was called 2 hours after the verdict was announced. Number one, did he know what the verdict was going to be? And number two, I mean, don't you find this timing just a little unusual?
Yes, it is somewhat unusual, but let me say one thing we haven't talked about in this discussion is resources. And the Attorney General only has so many resources. And it appears to me that if the case is going to ultimately be decided in the Supreme Court, and this was a 4th Circuit appeal court case, which is in North Carolina, it makes sense to me.
And is going to be appealed.
That's right. Yeah. Rather than try to reinvent the wheel, just wait and see what the high court says about it. I really understand the logic of them not doing anything on it, although it does appear to be political.
Well, and Becki, Dennis begs the question about, okay, limited resources. Do we have any idea how much money the Attorney General's office has really spent in defending this particular
I'm not sure
gay
we do,
marriage
but it may be something that we should ask. But even aside from the cost, it goes to his constitutional responsibility to defend the laws of North Carolina. And although the Virginia decision does appear to be very similar to North Carolina laws, the fact of the matter is this is part of our Constitution. The voters put it into our Constitution, and he has a responsibility to defend that. He's the Attorney General of the state of North Carolina.
But it just appears to me, and I don't disagree with what Becki's saying, but as a tax-paying citizen, you want to be good stewards of the resources. And it's just piling on. It's just redundant. It's just going to be another case for the Supreme Court to decide, and they're going to have this one going up from the 4th Circuit.
All
so
right,
just
but
wait
Chris,
and see.
The voters of North Carolina overwhelmingly approved this gay marriage amendment. Now, this is obviously going to become a campaign issue. We're going to see TV ads about this in 2016 if Roy Cooper runs against Pat McCrory, as we are expecting him to do. So with so many voters voting in favor of this, is it going to help Cooper or hurt him?
I don't know. I don't think we know yet. But remember, this was, if you look at the turnout in the May primary when this was put on the ballot, I think it was roughly a quarter of the people in North Carolina maybe turned out, and 60% of those voted for it. So this wasn't an overwhelming because of when it was put on the ballot, and we could argue about when it should have been on the ballot. This wasn't an overwhelming majority of North Carolina voters who put this on the ballot, number one. Number two, just North Carolina, just like every place else, attitudes are changing. There was a poll not long ago that showed 59% of the people support either gay marriage or civil unions.
So do you think if the vote were held today,
I think
the vote would be different?
I think it'd be at least very close, and I think it may well be different. I think that this, you know, I didn't meant to say this in an earlier answer. Every single federal court, every single one, think of when the last time that has happened, who has had a chance to evaluate a ban on gay marriage on a state has ruled against it. Every single one. I think it's in the 20s.
All right, Becki, let's just assume for the moment that this decision stands and our amendment is unconstitutional. Does that mean we are going to be expecting same-sex marriages here in North Carolina anytime soon?
That's why I think the decision ultimately will go to the federal Supreme Court. And then what happens and what sort of authority states have will be largely determined by that decision made by the Supreme Court. Because the question becomes not only will marriages between same-sex couples be legitimate in North Carolina, but will North Carolina honor same-sex couples that have been married in other states that have legitimately been married, moved to North Carolina? How do those rights and does that transfer with them? So there's all kinds of questions here that I think ultimately are going to be decided by the United States Supreme Court.
Interesting. And I'm sure we'll be talking about it again. I know it's going to become a campaign issue in 2016.
This continues to be a dilemma for Roy Cooper, I think, as long as he has his eye on a gubernatorial race as to how he defends the laws that have been put into place under a Republican General Assembly.
Not just that law, but other laws too.
Voter ID, and there's a whole slew of them that are moving their way through the court. So it becomes a real dilemma, I think, for Roy Cooper. Does he become a gubernatorial candidate, or is he the Attorney General of the state of North Carolina?
All right, after these messages, we're going to ask the question, do charter schools get more bang for the buck?
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Hi, I'm Linda Loveland. I want the best for my kids. Feeding them foods they like within my budget is a priority. But what do we really know about these foods? North Carolina farmers and food experts give you a website to find it all. FeedTheDialogueNC.com, a place where moms like you and me can learn more about the foods we eat and the farmers that feed us. Check it out. Add your input and help feed the dialogue. Let's talk food at FeedTheDialogueNC.com.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
A recent national study conducted by the University of Arkansas on the productivity of charter schools found that charter schools in North Carolina and other states uniformly outperform traditional public schools and have a significantly better return on investment for taxpayers. Now, Becki, most opponents of charter schools say that the reason for this is that they get to cherry pick the best students, but Dan Way in the Carolina Journal recently wrote that charters actually serve more minority, low-income, and special needs students. Two questions. First, can we believe the accuracy of this report? And if it's true, should we be putting more money in charter schools?
I think that we can trust the accuracy. This is a report that was done at the University of Arkansas through a special department that they have on education reform. It is a very well-respected, they've done a lot of different reports. They're frequently cited, the people that are associated with this, of a very high academic quality. And so I think the study can be trusted, certainly. What the study tells us basically is that you get a bigger bang for your buck with charter schools than you do with traditional public schools. This is the first national study that's been done along these lines, and they looked at cost efficiency and return on investment, and they found
and
that
measured them against the NAEP scores.
Right, the national scores. So it was they were comparing, you know, in 21 states were looked at in this, and across all of these 21 states and the District of Columbia, the same results were there, and that basically you get a bigger bang for your buck with a difficult population. These are hard kids, special needs, low income, you know, all of the things that you mentioned. The charter schools are doing a better job, and they're doing it with 70 cents on the dollar that traditional public schools do.
All right, Chris, I just got to toss you this softball. You buy that?
No, well, here's what I think. First of all, there's this famous study out of Stanford not too many years ago that found charter schools performed no better than average schools, and Stanford is very well thought of. It's an institute that actually supports charter schools and was trying to do a study to show that they were better and found out that there really is no difference. So I think we could go back and forth about studies. Here's several things about charter schools that are interesting. One is, charter schools by definition have one of the most important things that we think is important in education, which is parents involved in their education. Everybody says that's the most important. So you're self-selecting a sample. These parents are very involved because they've chosen a kid's charter school. So
well, they're obviously doing something to get them involved.
Well, I don't know about that. The parents are already involved, number one. Number two, there are plenty of charter schools that are very selective. Charter schools don't have to take every child. Charter schools, if a kid's causing trouble at the charter schools, guess what they do? They kick him out of the charter school, and guess where he or she goes? Back to the traditional public schools. Well, my point is, then you're judging the charter schools. And the third thing is, here's the big problem we have in North Carolina. We have charter schools that are completely unaccountable. I've talked many times on the show. There's a basketball factory in Winston-Salem that is corrupt, that is recruiting players from Bosnia, and we're paying for it. There's no accountability in our charter system, and yet we have these big pushes to approve all these applications and not follow up with how these schools are being run. So we have serious problems in our charter schools. Dennis, but I don't think all charter schools are bad. I think it's important that they're
Dennis, you were around when charter schools were in the legislature, when charter schools were created, and so you've heard this debate backwards and forwards. What are you believing about this report?
Well, I think the report does have merit, and I'm one of those that supported charter schools, Tom. When they were started, they were an experiment. You know, we were going to find out if they did do better, and this has morphed into a real hot issue in North Carolina because, as Chris said, they're siphoning off money from the public schools. But at the same time, there's some standards that aren't accounted for. There's some accountability problems, whether or not what they pay a teacher or what they pay an employee is public or not, and transparency is a real issue there. I also worry.
But at the end of the day, isn't the real judge of public education performance, output? I mean, how the kids are doing? Isn't that what we ought to be judging?
It certainly should be.
Well, it should be, and exactly that's the metric that we all want to use and strive for. But I think there was some other metrics involved in this study with Arkansas. It wasn't just the performance of the children; it was part of it, but there were other things involved.
Cost efficiency
that made the conclusions come out the way they did.
On investment.
And the return on investment. I don't want to have return on investment in the charter schools or any school. I think that's a bad method.
Wait a minute. Why not?
Return on investment. What are you getting the bang for your buck? If you're getting the highest quality education for less money, isn't that the direction that we should go in?
Well, what we ought to be focused on is what return on in investment on the academics. Does it enhance the performance in the classroom?
Well, that's what this report was saying.
And what we have
No, I think they're measuring the money, Tom.
No, the State Board of Education has an accountability process that's set up for these charter schools. There's a financial oversight that's also there. So the measurements are in place right now. The process is there. There are charter schools that fail. I mean, they're not doing well.
Very few.
They do fail, but there aren't any public schools that fail.
Well,
so there is that account. No,
that's because public schools have to take every child, Connie, every single one.
And
charter schools don't have to offer free and reduced lunch. They don't have to offer transportation. If you're a poor kid and you can't afford to eat lunch, how can you go to a charter school if they don't provide it?
And you're exactly right.
The
charter schools don't provide buses. They don't have their structure, their physical structure paid for, so that's where the cost savings
go. All kids.
Wait a minute, let her talk. Go ahead.
And they are approved based upon their mission statement on the types of children that will come. So the State Board of Education approves them, knowing that children that meet these parameters will be attending there. That is a decision made by a public entity. So the process is there. It's actually part of the bigger picture where you're not trying to make one size fits all. Every child is different, and we're going to have individual special schools that can meet these different needs.
All right, Chris, I'm going to give you the last word. 20 seconds.
We have a lot of individual choice within the public schools. I actually think some charter schools are doing a great job, some aren't, but we've gotten this mindset where all charter schools are always good. Let's open them all up. Let's don't keep them accountable and find out where our taxpayer money is going. I think that's a disaster.
When charter schools fail, they go in and close those schools immediately.
They got a basketball factory in Winston-Salem that's corrupt. Nobody's doing anything about it.
When the traditional schools fail, they just send more money there.
Oh, that's the cheap shot. That's the cheap shot.
We're gonna have this debate going on, I'm sure, for some time to come. After these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Does your North Carolina business or organization have a story to tell? I'm Richard Campbell, and at Carolina Broadcasting and Publishing, we help tell stories that connect you to the people who will respond. We take the time to understand our clients' needs and what makes them unique. We craft their stories through the efficient use of words, images, and videos that resonate with their desired audience. We also know that a good story is incomplete without a call to action. On video, on air, online, and in print, from concept to final production, no one can help tell your story more effectively or affordably than we can. For special introductory offers, visit carolinabroadcasting.com or call 919-832-1416. Again, that's carolinabroadcasting.com. Let us help tell your story today.
Where do you go when you need to know? A&C makes it easy for you to get the information you need to make well-informed public policy decisions. Our members are industry leaders who are ready to share their industry-specific insights with you. Want to hear both sides of the story? A&C members can tell you. Just use the A&C member directory as your guide or call us directly. A&C members have the knowledge, expertise, and perspective you need to create public policies that are good for North Carolina. We are ready for your call.
The discussion has been so interesting, we've run way over time, but I'm going to ask our panelists very quickly to tell us something we don't know. Chris.
One of the biggest disappointments in the budget was textbook funding. Governor McCrory asked for $24 million. He got $900,000. We still have we spend $16 per child per textbook, which is absurd.
Becki.
Highest priority for 2015 should be rebuilding the reserves. We have about 4% in reserves right now. We should be at 8%. That should be the focus
Connie,
for the
tell
2015.
us something we don't know.
Conversations are now occurring between the different conferees on coal ash, and hopefully we'll be hearing something next week.
Dennis.
I hear that the Republican House caucus is taking more notice of Leo Daltrey.
Interesting, as the next speaker. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback and read our weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.